Now we're going to add a wiggle expression to the head and the feelers of the ant. For that, we're going to create a wiggle controller. If you want to wiggle a lot of objects in your scene, it's great to have a controller, because if you want to make changes later, you want the wiggle to be a little bit stronger or more frequent, it's easier to make those changes to one controller rather than having to go into each expression of each layer that has the controller added to it. So for this, I have soloed everything that we need and I have shied everything that we don't need to see right now. We're going to create a null object with Command Control Alt Shift Y, trim it and give it a name. We'll name it wiggle underscore feelers and head. We'll now add a slider control to this. You can search in the Effects and Presets window, and if you don't have that, you can open it by going to Window, Effects and Presets and open this window right here. Now we'll take the slider control and we can double click or we can drag it onto here. So since I've done that twice, I now have two controllers, which is great because I need to anyway. We'll rename the first one frequency and the second one amplitude. Frequency determines how often per second the wiggle expression will be applied, and the amplitude specifies how strongly it will wiggle. So since we'll be adding this to the rotation, it's the amount of degrees it will wiggle. If it was for position, it would be the amount of pixel it would wiggle. Slider controls are great if you want to control layer properties or keyframes of one or more layers. They can also be used to keyframe expression values that would otherwise be hard to control. We are going to parent the frequency and amplitude values of our wiggle expression to these sliders and control them through the wiggle controller. Now we're going to add a wiggle expression to the rotation of the front feeler. We want to Alt-click the stopwatch and we'll type wiggle and 1, 2. The numbers are not important at the moment because we'll be changing these anyway. And we want to close the bracket. Now what we want to do is highlight the first number. The first number is the frequency. And we want to pick whip this to the frequency slider. Make sure these sliders are open, otherwise you won't be able to pick whip. Now we're going to highlight the second number and pick whip it to the amplitude slider. Now we can copy paste this expression to the other layers. We'll add a number here. Let's do 0.5 and 20. Now you can see that this is wiggling quite a lot. It's a little bit too strong. And since we've created this controller, we just need to go in here, adjust these numbers. Let's take this down to 10. And we don't need to touch these expressions at all. We'll hide that again. All we need to do is change our numbers in the controller. Now, wiggle is a great expression for adding simple movements when you have a lot of objects in a scene. The downside is that you cannot create a loop with wiggle because it calculates the position of an object for every frame randomly. If you prefer to have a looped animation, you will have to keyframe your objects and then add a loop expression to them. This is why we set our animation at 1 minute, so you have a good chunk of time where you can see your animation, but unfortunately you can't loop it at the end of that time. Now let's have a look at our whole ant, and this is what it looks like.